Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a software developer by learning to develop yourself, your skills, your network, and more. I'm Brian, your host. I want to break down a small, lightweight roadmap that's going to cover the main concepts and how to learn ReactJS in 2024. Because you must know ReactJS in 2020, 2022, 2024, and going on in the future. It's not going anywhere. It is the most popular JavaScript library out there. It's supposed to make your life as a web developer or front-end developer easier, but the reality is this is often a huge mental leap, mental shift for new developers. In fact, at Parsity, the React curriculum is among the most loved and the most hated pieces of the curriculum. And I get it. I understand that I can't make curriculum that everybody's going to love every single piece of it. It hurts my feelings a little bit when I get negative comments on there, but I get it, right? It's hard. It's a big, big shift. When you first start writing code, you do HTML. Fairly easy. Okay, you kind of get it. You write like a div or something on that. It appears on the screen and you think, cool, I got something I can look at. Add some CSS on there, you think even more cool. Now it looks pretty awesome, right? Then you add some JavaScript and you're thinking, okay, this is really tough. Eventually you get more comfortable doing things like for loops, if-else statements, declaring variables, the difference between const and let, working with arrays, eventually maybe working with APIs. I have a YouTube video on that, by the way, you should check out. I think it's a really good short introduction. I love doing short bite-sized things, by the way, because I think that's more palatable for people to actually go out there and do. Because 99% of the people listening to this or reading articles I've written or watching videos I've done just won't do the thing. And that's okay. I expect that that's going to be the case. Sometimes you just want to sit back and be entertained. But if you actually do these things, you're going to be light years ahead of your quote-unquote competition. Anyway, why is React so hard? It is an abstraction, meaning it's a layer that takes you away from the JavaScript, from raw JavaScript. Raw JavaScript is what you're probably used to, or you're trying to get used to if you're a new developer. You're writing raw JavaScript. Const x or var x equals document.getElement by ID box or whatever. You're writing this code and that's perfectly fine. It's normal. That's what the web runs on. Your browser needs JavaScript. It understands what to do with JavaScript. The problem is the web has gotten more and more complicated as users expect more and more and more. They just want more from us as web developers. So in 2010, the fine folks at Facebook, otherwise known as Meta, created a library called React. I think they called it something different back in the days. There's a documentary on it you should check out. I'm going to give you the very condensed version. They said, hey, we're building complex web stuff. We need something that's going to work better for what we do. And so they invented React. And now we all use it. Pretty wild. jQuery was the most popular kid on the block. It was the choice for all web development stuff. And it was pretty good. In fact, most of the web still has some jQuery that is being used on the web pages. Now, we don't teach jQuery at all at Parsity anymore. In fact, I erased all the jQuery stuff. One of the first things I did when I got there. Because the reality is you're not going to interact directly with jQuery probably ever again in your developer life. What you are going to do is write a whole lot of React. So step one, you got to know HTML, CSS, and some JavaScript. How much JavaScript? You should know how to work with arrays, objects, APIs, promises, and do things with asynchronous data fetching. Basically, can you write some code that will fetch some data from a third-party API, some API out there, application programming interface. Again, I have a video on this that I'll link in the episode notes if you're curious on how to do this. And if you can write that from scratch without too much help, then I think you are ready to jump into React. If you don't have a solid foundation in JavaScript, you can write React, but it's going to bite you later on down the line. Because I've met a lot of React developers who are not JavaScript developers, which is interesting because React is a JavaScript library. But again, it's an abstraction. It's this layer above JavaScript. It's almost kind of like you're driving a car, right? That doesn't make you a mechanic, right? You can drive the car totally fine. You can get from point A to point B. If anything happens in that engine and you're stuck on the road, you're going to have to call a mechanic to come and fix it. Now, in web development, that's kind of like React. React is like the nice fancy car. JavaScript would be the engine. And as a web developer, you're expected to not only know how to drive the car, but also how to work on the engine. So when you write React code, you're not really sure of why things aren't working. This usually boils down to you not being familiar enough with JavaScript. Now, being stuck in JavaScript land is a pitfall that too many developers fall into, where they keep getting better and better and better at JavaScript, or wanting to know all the nuances and all these different things about JavaScript. At Parsity, we actually go pretty deep into JavaScript, which I was on the fence about until I spoke with Jack Harrington and Kyle Simpson, two major players, intellectual giants in the JavaScript space. They both had different opinions, but Jack Harrington was much more forward about his idea that, hey, you really need to know a good amount of JavaScript. Kyle Simpson actually was like, I don't know if you need to know that much, but to him, that much might mean a lot, right? Because that's Kyle Simpson, the guy that wrote the You Don't Know JavaScript book series, one of the most popular books series on JavaScript in the world. Check that out as well.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying the show. Now, let me be clear. Learning how to code is not easy. It's even harder now with so much information about how you should be studying, what you should be learning, and the reality of the job market. Getting a job requires an entirely different skill set than learning how to code. You need both to succeed. At Parsity, we work with you one-on-one in a very small setting. We will only take 60 people per year to coach them from zero through hired. The reality is, if you're a career changer, you need that personalization to help you with your individual problems and your local job market. If you want to work with me and my team, go to parsity.io. If you want more information, just schedule a call with me by clicking on the link in the show notes. Now back to the episode.
So you are ready to learn React. You have a few choices. You buy some 100-hour Udemy tutorial. You go on YouTube and you spend another 100, 200 hours writing lots and lots of React code. And you're thinking, geez, do I really have to build this entire massive thing? No, absolutely you do not. What React boils down to in most of these JavaScript libraries that make it easier for you to write code on the web is that it solves a problem. And you should always ask, what is the problem being solved by me using this library? Are we just using it because it's cool? Are we using it because everybody else uses it? Are we using it because I have to get hired? Partially, right? I mean, you can't just ignore the fact that you need to be a hireable developer in order to get paid. And the best way to do that is to learn skills that will get you paid. You wouldn't want to learn some really archaic or ambiguous or niche thing that like only a few companies are hiring for. You want to be pretty general when you start off, so that way you have more options for the jobs that you're probably looking for. So what React solves is the problem like this. Pretend you're a web developer, or maybe you are a web developer. I was actually at a company that had this problem I'm going to break down. They had a multi-page site written in HTML, CSS, and some JavaScript, plain HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. This was a problem at some point because you have a footer and a header on a page, right? It's probably the same throughout the website. Think about if you go to an e-commerce website, you have a footer and you have a header. And when you click around the pages, you go to a different page, a different URL, and another route is displayed, right? You have the about section, you have the shopping section, you have your account section. The header and the footer remain the same, but that's 7, 10, 12, 20, 100 different pages. Okay, you've built that out. You've copied and pasted that footer across 100 files. Now you've said, great, we're done. You deploy it to the web. Customers are happy. You realize there's a small typo and the boss says, hey, can't help but notice you have a small typo there. And so what do? You copy and paste the typo 100 times. This is what people did. This is what people do in some cases, not very often, I hope. But this presents a real problem. You don't have what is reusable code, which is really important for the web. Not only that, the performance can sometimes suffer on sites that have a lot of interaction, because now it's very rare that you're writing a static website. You're not usually writing websites that have just like a picture and, a button that links to some other page. You're doing really complex stuff. You might have videos, you have button events that open up modals and other things on the page. You have API requests and you want to get those requests and show more data. You have real-time data. Think about the stock market tickers. things that capture incoming real-time data. Maybe you want to know about a world event going on, or you're like something like Twitter or Facebook where you have a news feed where you're constantly getting pumped information. So you have all these things you need to manage on the web nowadays that isn't so easy to do with basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, or even with jQuery. So along comes React to the rescue, and the big selling point for React is reusable components. And it's written in a weird way. But the first thing you got to do if you want to get started with React, some people are going to get really mad that I say this, and some people are going to say, I don't even know what you're talking about. And some people are going to say, you're right. Guess what? I'm right, because the React team says I'm right. If you go to react.dev, which is the documentation that the React team has built, which is excellent documentation, that is, in my opinion, where you should start. You shouldn't start with YouTube tutorials. You should start with the documentation, because getting used to reading documentation as a developer is an important skill. You're not going to get sent a YouTube video by your manager or your teammates to tell you how to do something. You're going to get sent a document, either an internal one or a link to the external one that says, hey, read this, figure it out, come back, and let's figure it out, right? Write some code, not a 20-hour video. So don't do that at first, at least. If you want to do videos later, do whatever the hell floats your boat. So go through the react.dev documents, just some basic stuff like how do you just start a React project? And React is a little weird because it's a library, which means it's not really usable on its own. So you really need to use it within a larger framework. You have a few options out there: Create React App, Vite, RemixJS, or Next. The React team in their documentation, their official docs, say use Next or use Remix. I personally would use Next. Next, for all its faults, is becoming incredibly popular to use, and you should be learning it because React has basically made a decision to kind of merge with Next.js. So you spin up a Next.js app, which will have React inside of it. And the first thing you need to do is go to the entry point for that app, which will likely be at page.js or maybe at app.js. You basically want to find this main entry point, and what you'll see is a JavaScript function. You'll see something like export default homepage, and it's a function that returns what looks to be some HTML, but it's not HTML. It's JSX, JavaScript XML. I'm not going to dig into that because I think that's actually more confusing to talk about than anything. I think you might want to look that up. But what it is essentially JavaScript code that looks like HTML and for all intents and purposes is HTML with a few key differences. It's JavaScript and it will compile. It'll get boiled down to HTML when it gets loaded in the browser, because the React code you write is actually for you as a developer to have this reusable code. When you deploy it or when you compile it, when you make it so it is browser readable, it will boil back down to just JavaScript at the end of the day. React code is code that you write on your machine, but at the end of the day, it will boil down. It'll be compiled into JavaScript, HTML, CSS, the stuff that your browser can read. And you're thinking, wait, I thought we were getting away from that stuff with this cool React thing. Yeah, what React does, it provides you a framework, a library that allows you to write code in such a way that they look at it and say, we're gonna take that code that you wrote and we're gonna send it to your browser as something it can actually read. And we're gonna do all these cool modifications and transformations in the background that you don't need to know anything about, my friend. Don't you worry, we'll handle all that for you. Your website will be really performant. At least that's what we promise you. And it will be so easy for you to write. So you just write a thing once and you can use it all over the place. Cool. You have access to this React code and you're thinking, what do I do now? First thing you want to do, make a component. When React components are basically just functions which return some JSX or some HTML. The HTML will have a few key differences in that we'll have class names instead of class. You don't probably use IDs as much as you would, but you'll have something called a class name, and it's spelled camel case with a lowercase c and an uppercase n, class name. The same way you'd write it in JavaScript, right? Because it is JavaScript that gets boiled down or compiled to some JavaScript, right? Some React code that gets compiled down to some JavaScript, some HTML code that will run in your browser. So you create a folder. Call it components, maybe. And in that folder, you're going to make a component file, and that file can be called greeting.js. greeting.js, and this is going to be a greeting component. And you might say export default function greeting, and greeting will return a div, and in that div there's an h1, and in that h1 it says greeting. Boom, you've just created your first component. Now, how do you use that component? What you do is go back to your main file in app.js or page.js. You will import greeting from that particular file path. So you write something like import greeting, capital G, REETING from, and then the file path like // or / component / greeting, whatever the file path that will lead you to that greeting component file. And then to actually use it, so this function, which returns some HTML code essentially, will be invoked just like a JavaScript function. But instead of writing like greeting with 2 parentheses at the end, you wrap it in angle brackets. So you have a caret on one end. So you have like just like a div almost. So you have like 1 caret on one end, and then you write greeting, and then you have a backslash and a caret on the other end. Basically like a self-closing element. It's like a self-closing element that you've custom created. It's a custom component greeting. Now I want you to copy and paste that like 3 or 4 times. When you open up your browser with your Next.js app running, you're going to see 3 different instances, 3 versions of that greeting component. Pretty cool. Imagine how much time you could save now when you need to make a change and you have that greeting component or the footer or header or whatever else you're going to componentize. Imagine how much time you're going to save now when you can make the change one place and boom, it's everywhere. Now, the last thing we're going to do, we're going to kick it up a notch. We're going to add props, make these more flexible, make these more customizable. What if you wanted to have a greeting that had most of the same style and architecture, the same setup as your greeting component, but you wanted to be a little more custom? You wanted to be able to say, like, hi, Brian, or hi, Bob, or hi, Susie, or something like that. React allows you to pass in props, basically arguments, the same way that a JavaScript function can take in arguments, like, function add. You might have sum1 or xy, and you might say x plus y, return x plus y. You can do that same thing with React components. So in your greeting component file, in the parentheses where you're, invoking the export default function greeting or whatever, in those parentheses, I want you to put in curly braces, I want you to put name. This is important. The name that you name this, let's say you put title instead. Whether you put title or name or X, that name is important because you're going to use that same exact naming convention back in your main file where you are importing that greeting component. So go back to your main app.js or page.js file, and in your greeting component, right after greeting, I want you to write a space and then the name of that argument that you wrote in the other file. So let's say you called it title. I want you to put title equals Brian, right? And then on the next one, I want you to put title equals Susie. And on the next one, I want you to put title equals Malcolm X or whatever, right? Let's go back to that greeting component one more time. Now, with that title that you have in the curly braces up there in your function, I want you to reference that in your H1. So you have a return and you have your H1 and it says hi. And then after hi in the H1, I want you to put curly braces, and in the curly braces, I want you to write title. So that way it says hi and then curly braces title. The curly braces let React know that this is going to be a JavaScript variable that you're passing in, and it's going to interpret that variable and give you the value of that variable. So in this case, it should say, hi, Susie, hi, Malcolm X, hi, Brian, hi, Bob, hi, whatever. And if you didn't pass anything in, it'll just say hi. It will just say, oh, you didn't give me the thing. That is what you're going to do. Congratulations. You've just learned the most basic pieces of React. You've written a component, you've exported it, you've imported it, you're using some props. And now, of course, you go on to, well, what do I do next? Like, how about user interactions? What about when you click on something? How about when you want to, have more pages and things like that? That'll lead you down some interesting rabbit holes. The next thing you should learn are going to be hooks. Hooks are super important for managing the state of your app. For when a person types in something and they want to see the output of that, or you want to click on something and then an event happens. You don't use document.getElementById anymore. You don't use, add event listener anymore. No. You're going to use hooks like useState, useEffect. And those are the only two hooks I think you should be working with at this point. If you can learn to do this small task, which I'm going to outline, I think you're in a good spot to keep moving on with React. I want you to be able to write a small form, and that form in React will have like an input and a button, right? I want you to type something in the input. When that button is clicked, it should show that value on the screen, like above the form, for example. And that value should also disappear from the form. So you have a form with a button. You type in, welcome to React. You type submit, whatever, or click, or a button, something. And then on the screen above the form, it'll say, welcome to React. Whatever you typed in will be there, and it will then disappear from the box. This is a good first step. After that, you want to learn how do you use APIs? How do you fetch data? And how do you display all that on the screen? If you want a video of me going over this stuff, just let me know. I'm totally open to doing that. Only so much I can really talk about in an episode like this. It's really not the best way to learn. But if you're listening to this and you're near your computer, great way to get started. Hope that's helpful as usual. And if you are interested in joining Parsity and learning like from a human and, people and software engineers and not through me just talking into a microphone, it's a great time to join. That'll do it for today's episode of the Develop Yourself podcast. To learn more about becoming a software engineer with us, then check out parsity.io. If you're not quite ready for that, then jump into our dev30.xyz program, which is 30 days of working on your mindset, habits, and JavaScript skills. Totally worth it. See you next week.